Now, I described to you how the first line is fundamentally yin and the second line is fundamentally yang. The first line goes deep into things it needs to. It needs to find out what the foundation is. It needs to get to the basis of things. We've seen that the second line is a natural. That is, it does what it does, and it goes about it, and it doesn't have to know how it all works. It's just quite content going about its own business. Neither the first nor the second line have any kind of real capacity to deal with the other. In other words, they have to learn every time they meet the other. The being lower trigram, being non-transpersonal, the first line in its introspection, we've already seen that the personality first line in its two unconscious themes, they either have to be bumped into, third line theme, or they have to wait for friendship to come to them, fourth line theme. That first line personality isn't looking for anything other than the foundation that it wants, whatever that is, its field of interest, of study. When we get to the second line, we already know that the second line doesn't want to have anything to do with the other. It's not interested in the other. And at the moment that it has to deal with the other, it has to deal with all the consequences of meeting the other in its life. Neither the first or second line has a real understanding of what the other is about. So when you get to the third line, because you're getting to a completion point, that is, you're finishing the lower trigram structure, you're getting to the point where you're going to have to make the bridge to the transpersonal. You know, one of the ways to see the relationship between the lower trigram and the upper trigram is that basically it's a spiral staircase. And, you know, that staircase runs between the third line and the fourth line, you know, so that you can get from the ceiling of the first floor, the third line, to the floor of the upper trigram, the fourth line. It means that both the third line and fourth line are inherently unstable. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're carrying third or fourth line profiles that you're an unstable person. What it does mean, though, that these lines in and of themselves are open to mutation. It's why the third line specifically is an evolutionary line. It's not in any way really solid. The third line theme is the theme of trial and error. We began with the third line at the unconscious in this lower trigram, and we finish with the third line as the personality. And you can really see that the lower trigram as a whole operates out of a third line general theme. In other words, this is the field of trial and error. That third line, trial and error, is about having to go through many things in order to get to a place of synthesis or discovery, or both. And that theme of bonds made and broken is about the fact that this is a realm of the need for a spectrum of stimulation. That it has to go through and experience many, many things. And in going through and experiencing them, this is the first time that you have a personality that not so much knows there's an other, but is designed to bump into them and find them. Remember that the first and second line personalities really want to be left alone, so they're not looking for anyone. The third line isn't looking for anyone, but it's looking. It's out there trying things. And through that, it ends up bumping into all kinds of forces. It's because of this bumping into that you can end up with this pessimism and all kinds of things, because, of course, what you bump into is not necessarily what's for you. Discernment is what you have to learn very early if you're carrying a third line theme. In other words, you bump into something, you have to know whether it's worthwhile for you to stay with that experience or to break the bond and move on. Because you're always going to meet the other that way. Now, of course, what happens is that the third line, because it's bonds made and broken, because it's banging into people, what you have is a lot of instability in the work life and instability in relationships. That, you know, it is a dominant theme in divorces. It's a dominant theme in quitting jobs. It's a very, very common factor. when we get to the first third line profile, the foundation cross, we get to the 3-5, and we have the martyr heretic. Now think about that. You've got a trial and error heretic at work. You know? If they get burnt at this stake, they move on to the next. And when they're born, you just bring their parents steak sauce. You just keep them moving. First of all, the nature of being a martyr. We have two aspects of this. One aspect is the martyr that stands by its higher principles, and that's really what it's about. See, the heretic is there to change us. The heretic will bring a new value, a new structure, whatever. The martyr is here to stand up for a principle. That's what they're here for. Now, of course, you can end up with the detriment, which is the martyr complex. You know, always seeing, I mean, the most common thing that third line people will say is, why me? Or why now? Or why them? So, one of the main themes for the 3-5 is that it's going to have to find the principles that it can live by. And that the 3-5 is the only profile that can actually transform those principles and turn them into a universalizing force. In other words, to create a new principle, to create a heresy. And of course, if that heresy is not practical, you pay the price. The projected attitude. The third line attitude is best expressed by that great American philosopher Groucho Marx, who said never belong to an organization that would have you as a member. Well, it's true. This is the third line theme. Never belong to an organization that would have you as a member. This is pure anarchy. Now, anarchy has a bad reputation. You know, from crazy 19th century people who are just throwing bombs. You know, the whole basis of anarchy is that it's enormously valuable for us. One of the things that I always tell third line people is for them to understand that when they do something and it doesn't work, that's what they're there to find out. That it didn't work. I mean, it's enormously valuable to find out things that don't work. I mean, you know, you would save people so much time if you could give them a list when they were born of what doesn't work and they don't have to bother with. I mean, it's incredible how much time that would save us. So that's what the 3-5 is here to do. It's here to say, this doesn't work. It's not here to say, oh, Jesus, it didn't work again. You know, put another nail in. It's not what it's about. It's about saying, this didn't work. I know this didn't work. And you should know. That's their fifth line unconscious. You should know that this doesn't work. Don't waste your time. Now, of course, if you don't understand that, you end up getting lost in the third line pessimism. You end up getting lost in the, oh, you know, I can never do anything that lasts, and I can never do anything that works, and nobody ever wants to stay with me, and I'm always making mistakes. I mean, Western culture, never mind Western culture, world culture, when it comes to this word mistake, I mean, this is a word that makes people crazy. I mean, there are so many people that are so caught up in mistake as something that is this deep, endless pit of negativity. You made a mistake, that's a mistake, it's your fault, you know, all of this stuff. But mistake, there's no choice. There's no choice. There are no mistakes. There are processes. You can call it anything you like. You can call it a schmorgel. Doesn't make any difference. It's simply a process. And what we do is we say, you made a mistake, and then we say, you're bad, you're stupid, you're inefficient, you know, learn better, blah, blah, blah. Instead of seeing that these third line people, they're here to make mistakes. That's how they know what doesn't work. And then they can tell you. And instead they have parents who say to them, don't ever make a mistake again. You know, it's torture for them. And they think that there's something wrong with that. I mean, they really think there's something wrong. There isn't anything wrong. That's what they're here to find out. That's their job on this planet. Collect what doesn't work and tell people, 3 5s, universalize that. You tell them, that doesn't work. Don't do that. I did it. It's terrible. Don't do that. And then they're honored. So the anarchist. Underneath the anarchist is the general. Now this is very different than having a general underneath a Democrat. You see, this anarchist says, all right, I finally found what works. We're going to tear down all this stuff that doesn't work, and I'm going to take charge, and I'm going to show you practically how to build this thing properly. Now, as long as that fifth line underneath can provide what is practical, they can succeed. They can really transform a society, a community around them by their power. Now, whenever you're looking at whatever it is, if you're looking at type or you're looking at profiles, you're always going to see that there's always going to be differences in whether or not it's relatively easy to access your themes. It's tough for 3 5s because the response to their personality from those people that raised them, it so quickly can destroy their capacity to really be of universal value. And it all has to do with this, you did that wrong, they're told, and it's a horror. It's interesting in my own process. I have a third-line mind. I'm not a third-line profile, but the gates that are active in my mental system are third line. So I've gone through in my life process all kinds of knowledge, taking it in and leaving it behind. And making all kinds of mistakes in that way. And yet one of the things that I recognize about that is that I went through so many mental concepts through my third line trial and error that I finally got to a point where I could see how all of them worked. In other words, if you don't give up, and that's the most important thing about the 3 5, they don't give up. Remember this about third line people. You know, third line is always going to carry with it its aspired to role of sustainment. You know, they stay with it. They're very, very powerful forces in which they stay with their process. You know, they do pull themselves up by the bootstrap. It just depends on how much psychic damage they suffer in always being pointed at for doing what's wrong when that's their job. It's their job. So if you have a 3 5 child, you know, you have to learn to give grace to that third line. You have to give it its grace. You have to allow them to go through their process. When I was I've taught at many levels. I've taught in all kinds of environments. And one of the things that I've always done with students of mine is that I've always provided them with positive reinforcement. I never looked at what they did wrong. I never cared about their mistakes. I never made that an issue, because it's not. It's the way we learn. We go through these processes. The third line must do that, and they must be respected for that. So that when you have a child who says, you know, I tried this and it didn't work and I'm going to leave it, the thing is not to say to them, oh yeah, you're leaving another one, eh? Can't stay with anything. You know, it's not that typical attitude. It's, well, you must have learned something interesting in that anyway. That's all. Don't throw it away. Don't bury it. That's something, you got something out of that. You did it. You went through it. Didn't work, okay. But there were things you learned in that. Don't see that as a mistake. Don't see that you made a mistake. I mean, this is a horrible thing. I mean, it's a horrible thing that we do to human beings. The limited perspective. The limited perspective is that on the surface you've got a third-line personality that's fundamentally pessimistic. It is. And it has good reason to be pessimistic. Things don't work. I mean, that's the whole point. You know, they find out right away, things don't work. I mean, they end up being the best fixers, eh? I mean, after all, I mean, if you go through life seeing what doesn't work, you learn so much. Because when you find something that works, you don't care about it. What do you care? My car works. I don't have to worry about how it runs. I mean, you don't care. But if it breaks down, you're in the middle of nowhere. You got to pay attention. This is the beauty of third line people. And of course, the moment that we reinforce that, the moment that we show them this is normal, it's okay, it's all right, that's your gift, you tell us what doesn't work. You've got different human beings, eh? They start to glow. I made another mistake. And it's wonderful. Because after all, that's the way it should be. Yeah, I went through that, it didn't work. That's another one. I'm going to mark it down in my didn't work book. Eh? So they start off with the pessimism, but recognize what's underneath. What's underneath is the Savior. If you're somebody that sees it doesn't work. You go on a picnic with a friend of yours, and the friend picks up a mushroom, puts it in his mouth. 10 minutes later, they're dead. The next time that you're with somebody and you see them pick up that mushroom, you can say, by the way, that doesn't work. That kills you. They're really good for that. I mean, that's their whole point. So underneath this pessimism that says this doesn't work, that doesn't work, is actually the gift of being the Savior. You see, we're not saved by being told what works. We're not. Our salvation comes from somebody saying to us, look, that doesn't work. Leave it alone. It's okay. And it's so important to have these people in our lives. The aspire to roll. The third line is all about sustainment. So what you have to see is that in terms of their personality, of course, what they would really like to do is not break bonds at all, but they would like to be able to sustain things. That's why they can keep on going when something doesn't work, and they can go to the next thing and try the next thing. They're being sustained in that by their personality. If you see 3-5s in your life, these are people that are generally admired. They're generally admired because they're seen to be people who are, courageous in a way. In other words, that they don't just fall apart. They don't lie down. They really do make an effort in that sense to keep their process going. And it's the kind of people that you want with you if you know you're going to have a hard struggle ahead. Because they have the equipment, they have the perseverance to be able to stay with that. So that their sustainment takes them. One of the most important keys, particularly for young adults who have the third personality, particularly, and they're headed in towards some kind of a career in life, that it's so important for them to understand that they need to have the kind of work in their life that has a multiple level of stimulation. I mean, in simple terms, if you're a third line person and you see a new client every day, you're not going to quit your job. Day one, you meet a client, you make the bond, and then you break the bond. Day two, you can meet a client, make the bond, and break the bond. But if you have to see the same client every day, and you have to service them for years, you're going to divorce them. You're going to go away from that and not return. So one of the things to understand about the third line nature is that the third line nature needs to have a work field, a work opportunity field in which they can do a lot of things where they can have new stimulation. They're not going to be good at doing the same thing over and over and over again. The sustainment is backed up by the fifth line power to attract projection, and in that sense to attract the hopes or expectations of others. So the 3-5 is under a lot of pressure. Anybody who bangs into them thinks that they've discovered them. You bang into a 3-5 and then you think, wow, they could be this and that. They've got all this. They could help me with my problem. You're the one that I've been looking for. I mean, 3-5s must hear that a lot. I've always been looking for you. I know you can help me. They get all of that stuff. That attractiveness also creates, as I mentioned earlier about the fifth line, it also creates paranoia. In other words, that the fifth line recognizes that there is projection pointed at it. Now, understand something. If you project on somebody and they know you're projecting on them, they can never be certain that you really see them. I mean, you can project on Ra Uru Hu, doesn't mean you know me. And I know that, because that's what projection fields do. So the fifth line is sitting there saying, wait a minute. Do you really see who I am? I mean, do you really think that I can help you? Do you really see, They're not so certain. So there is a built-in suspiciousness that is there. And, of course, that attractiveness with the 3-5 is bringing people into their lives that they're not controlling in any way. They bump into them, after all. So there is this natural suspiciousness that it may not really work. That they may not be the right ones, that it may not be the right thing to do, because after all, at the social level, that third line personality is only going to get involved through people coming into its life and pulling it out. Where the difficulty grows is in their bonding strategy. After all, the third line personality is a personality of bonds made and broken. That's a personality that says, I get in, I get out. That's it. So you end up with all kinds of short-term experiential processes that don't necessarily have any lasting value, that create a feeling of deep pessimism. This doesn't work, that doesn't work. The real danger is when it gets to the point that they're saying nothing works. Again, if you do not understand how important it is for you as a third line being to see that what doesn't work is your most important attribute, it's essential for you. If you end up piling all of that up and saying nothing works, then life is terrible. And of course, it's just not true. There are some things that do work. There's a hell of a lot more that don't, which is why the third line person is deeply aware of that. They find that out in a hurry. So in that bonding strategy, with their bonds made and broken, the first thing is that you bump into them and you may be able to have a relationship with them, but then again, you don't know if it's going to last. And when you bump into them, they seduce you. This is what they do. It's what fifth line people do. You bump into a fifth line person and all of a sudden you're in their auric seduction. And then you really think that they're this and that, whatever the case may be. And if you don't fulfill that, if you don't turn out to be the greatest lover since God knows who, you're really in trouble. If you can't really solve their problem, you're really in trouble. The whole projection field goes crashing down, and then you become a martyr that's burnt at the stake. And you say, relationships, they don't work. See, if you know your profile, if you know that you're a seductive force at the unconscious level, take advantage of it. Don't suffer from it. That's the whole point. The whole point is for you to take advantage of what you are, to eliminate resistance in this life, to be able to enjoy what it is to be you, to have your body, your health, all of those things. None of these things are a problem. All of them can be delicious if you just let them be what they are. That 3-5, they're here in this life to be bumped into and to seduce the other. And out of that, they have their opportunity through trial and error to find out how they can be a savior, how they can be a general. They start off wanting to be saviors and generals when they're babies. But it doesn't mean they can do it. It doesn't mean that they have the practical tools. These are children that really have to go through in life. They have to have their experiences. They have to add up those experiences until they get to a point where they know how to bring something practical. And in bringing that, they really get their reward, because they get, in a sense, they get a larger glow around them than other profiles, because they get the projection field attached to them. And in that, they can feel wonderful instead of being depressed and nothing works and all of that stuff. And it all goes back to what they are as children. See, the adult coming to this knowledge always comes with a handicap of deep conditioning. You're all in a restart program. And it's a long-term program. It's a 7-year phase in your life. It takes time to become yourself. Yet in the same way, if you get to that point, our children don't have to go through that. We can eliminate that in their lives. They don't have to be negatively conditioned. They don't have to learn later in life that their mistakes were really their truth and it was of great value to them. They don't have to see themselves as failures. They can understand their beauty and their place in this life. And everybody has a right to that. As an adult, it's harder. It takes more time, takes more focus on your part. Young people will grab that very quickly. Now, it's a different movie. But if you're dealing with third-line children, please, or friends of yours, or what you come across in your work, let them know how important that is for them to understand. That this trial and error process is something that's deeply healthy and important for them. It's not to be punished. It's not to be made fun of. It's not to be ridiculed. It's not to be debased. It's not to be any of those things. It's just a prejudice, and it's a prejudice out of ignorance. And it's one of the most important things that out of this knowledge, we can help a lot of people just be at peace with what it is to be themselves. And that's what it's about. When it comes to their security strategy, again, all third lines are dealing with bonds made and broken. So, of course, they don't have a secure sense of their potential as long as they see that they're, constantly having a job and leaving a job is somehow detrimental to their eventual success. And it isn't. They have to get to the point where they find the right thing. So it's through that bonds made and broken that they do get that. In other words, they need to sample things. They need to check them out. They need to test them in order to see whether they have possibility. But most important of all for third lines, pretty personality third lines, is this need to have work in which they have a great deal of stimulation, in which they're not fixed on doing the same thing. This is essential. Now think about what that means for children in school who have a third line theme. And our school systems are one of the most boring environments that exist. And we've extended education to the point that we have most people in schools until they're in their 30s. So, what we've done is that we've really, we've opened all of that up. There's an enormous boredom space in there. The same stuff over and over and over again. The same face over and over and over again. A third-line student who has to look at the same teacher day in and day out, 6 hours a day, they go nuts. I mean, it's something that is just so uncomfortable for them. And again, at some point, we have to begin to respect the fact that each and every one of us has a unique way, in not only in the way in which we digest knowledge, but in the way in which we have a right to get knowledge delivered to us. This is so important to see. And of course, if we're dealing with the way in which the school systems operate, we know that mistakes are punished. We know that if you're a third-line student and you're going to make your mistakes, you know that you're the one particularly that's going to be pointed out and punished for that. You're the martyr, after all. You see, she still can't do it. Whatever the case may be, pointing at the blackboard. It's a horrible thing for them. And of course, this again goes back to, what it means to be a part of knowledge when it's new. All of us can see how nice it would be if our teachers, if our administrators, if the workplace, if everybody really understood everybody else, it would be a much more peaceful and beautiful life. We all know that, but of course that's, at least at this moment, is a deep, 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 deep idealism. We have to deal with what we have. So what we need to do is that we need to make sure that we protect our children by educating them ourselves to make sure that they understand. And at the same time, if you have influence or you have the kind of connection with a teacher or with somebody that you're working with or they're going to work with, to try to get it across to them what they need to know about that child in order to protect it. It's pointless for us with this knowledge, not to make as great an effort as we can to help any young person that we can, because it's essential. We don't want them to be as fucked up as all of us, eh? So the security strategy of bonds made and broken, when you get underneath and you get to the unconscious, what you're dealing with in that humanity is that you're dealing with the distributor and the hoarder. Now remember, again, the projection field, it's always going to be there on the fifth line. So, of course, the fifth line is always breaking bonds. They're the ones that are always considered the hoarders. You know, they're the ones that you know, they enter into the relationship with you and then they pull away. And they're the ones that get blamed. And of course, it's not their fault. I mean, it's just not their fault. If you're a third-line person and you find something that it doesn't work, you have to leave. I mean, you have to leave. What else are you going to do? It doesn't matter whether it's a relationship, your family, your doctor, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. You know, if it doesn't work, you leave. That's the whole point. Now, of course, that has a deep impact on the relationships that threes have. And if you're a 3-5 and the other is projecting on you because you've seduced them and they think you're their savior, you know, and you pull it away and you're not going to be their savior anymore, boy, does your reputation suffer. You know, then you're seen as the selfish hoarder and, you know, you fooled them, you seduced them, you're dangerous, you should be dealt with, let's punish that one. You know, 3-5s end up, you know, building walls around their world because they know that there's a world out there that will punish them quickly. We don't like mistakes. You know, they get all that weight put on them. So the 3-5 lives in quite a projection field. And of course, when they're distributing, everybody thinks they're great. They're being the savior. You know, they're doing all those wonderful things. And it's one of the most important things about anybody that carries the fifth line. And it's something that you have to go back to over and over and over again. And by the way, as you look at these themes of the lines as I describe them, recognize that you can use this understanding to look at the lines themselves in your chart, no matter where they are. Wherever you see a fifth line in your chart, that's your potential to seduce, to generalize, to be the savior, to be all of these things. So it's important to look at that. And wherever you see that fifth line, recognize that it's only through being practical that you can survive the projection field, because you can deliver. You know, if you're a 3-5 and you believe in some mantra that was sent to you by some, you know, UFO captain, and you're going to deliver that to the whole world, you know, they're going to burn you at the stake. Because the moment that it doesn't work, you're in big trouble. You're just a fraud. You're a charlatan. You know, they're going to ride you out of town. That 3-5, the moment that it can't bring what's practical, that's the moment that it's really at risk. That's the moment that it opens itself up to punishment. And it's the punishment through the expectation of the other. The other who says, I thought you were going to be the one. And of course, the 3-5 is just saying trial and error. Trial and error. That's not true. It didn't work with you. I'm going to put this in my list of what didn't work. This didn't work with you. I don't do this again with you. But you know what to do. You see, if you accept yourself, we have all this judgmental stuff that we carry around about how people are supposed to behave, how they're supposed to act, how they're supposed to be with each other. And of course, each of it carries with it a grain of truth. But there's different types, and there's different profiles. They all have their way. And in honoring that way, not only that, we get to see the beauty of the diversity. Because we all end up integrating with each other that way. And if you understand the power in a 3-5, and if you meet a 3-5 that can deliver what's practical, you're really going to honor them. They're going to be very special for you. They bring mutation into your life. They can really be somebody that can be of value to you. They can guide you. They can help you. That can be spectacular. And at the moment that you see that it grows out of kids that make mistakes that aren't punished, you can see how few really valuable 3-5s we have in the world. See, that's the whole thing. It's like when people come to me and I have their design on my desk. And what sits down beside me is the not self. And what's on my desk is their design. And the design's perfect. I mean, it's perfect. It's as beautiful as anything can be. It's absolutely perfect in every single way. All of us are, after all. We all have our own genetic mix within the totality. It's just perfect. And yet I have that not self beside me. who isn't even close to what that perfection is, can't even imagine that that is there in them in their life. And on the other side, you have this global index of ours where we have our purpose, where we come in a specific way. How is that 3-5 really ultimately going to fulfill its purpose if it's hammered all the time when it's young? That's a tough road. And we don't end up with the martyr heretics that we need. In the same way that we have all kinds of chaos on this planet because people don't know who they are, so they don't live out their nature. And we have all of this turmoil and we have all of this confusion. See, it's all about surrender. You know, the longer people work in design, the longer they see different aspects of their nature over time, the more they realize how helpless they are. It's that helplessness that's so beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful. It's not powerlessness. It's helplessness. You know, we are all given all of the tools that we need. And we're given the track that we can run along. And if we weren't interfering all the time, trying to drive the car in some other direction, trying to change the costume, trying to change the paint color, whatever it is, if we just didn't interfere, we would see that by just living out our design, that your purpose comes to you automatically. It's automatic. It just unfolds like that, instantly. And you need support in that. You need support from people who understand. And at the same time, you have to see that, yeah, this knowledge belongs to children. Make sure they get access to it. You know, so we have some really good 3-5s out there who can have deep impact on the rest of society.